Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
A Cradle Full of Meat, Part 2, a horror story, from Reddit, r/Scarystories. Alice took her hands away from her face. All her muscles tightened like ropes, and her body ached with tension. She stood on tiptoe for some reason. What was it? Was she home again? Alice recognized the light-colored wallpaper of her bedroom. She stood on her full foot and turned around. Familiar walls, familiar furniture, familiar room. A familiar mess. There was a mattress and crumpled bed sheets on the floor. The empty bed was pushed out of its place, and there was a layer of smeared dust beneath it. She found herself home again. But the escape, the darkness, the people tearing her alive, was it all just a nightmare within a nightmare? No, Alice realized, and that realization hit her. She pushed back the bed, under which she found a human leg, and everything was exactly as she remembered it. Alice ran out into the hallway as fast as if she were being chased and ducked her head to the peephole. They were all there, standing by her door, pushing and pulling against each other. The light was on, and she could see them all perfectly well, a crowd of girls, young women, old women, a crowd of cripples without arms, legs, eyes, mouths, jaws. Some had no visible injuries, but their eyes stared just as piercingly and greedily, the look Alice already knew. What was missing from these? Internal organs? This is not a dream. Alice realized this with all terrifying clarity. Even if she were asleep, lying in a coma or, no, it could not be that bad, this had become her new reality. Something was playing with her, it was also setting the rules of that game. She stepped away from the door. Running away would not work. Suicide would not work either. Alice had no doubt that the creature that was playing hide-and-seek with her would not let her go until it had had enough, and even death was no obstacle to it. Had she already? The sudden idea that floated to the surface from the turbulent maelstrom of thoughts seemed simple and ingenious. She had already lost 2 attempts, but what if she could find the parts stolen from these women, and return them to them? But how? Open the door a little, and slip a limb through to the outside? But how to keep them from breaking through to her? Alice felt like she was left on a tiny island in the middle of raging black water. The idea seemed salvific, hopeful, and empowering. Following this thought came another, the one with which her mind dissolved into the silence of death. What happened to Dimitri? Her head was spinning with a jumble of thoughts. Later, all later. Alice squeezed her eyes shut, and shook her head violently, chasing away the anxiety. No matter what happened, her worry and suffering would not help them. She could not think about it now, she had to act. Alice started straight for the hallway. But in the drawers of the dresser there was nothing but bills and junk. There is still a bathroom, a kitchen, a living room, and a bedroom ahead. There is not a lot of places big enough for limbs. What about organs? Now it was even more like a game of hide-and-seek. What will happen when she puts this puzzle together? Would the terror become so intense that it would wake her from her nightmare? In a hospital bed, on a gurney in the morgue, Alice knew her nightmare would only end if she solved this puzzle. Whether she was asleep or her brain agonizing in deathly terror was painting these pictures, right now the body parts, the distraught people guarding her door, the endless night, this was her reality. Alice returned to the kitchen. One by one, she opened all the cabinets and doors, shaking out the contents, with her nostrils stinging from the scattered spices. The middle drawer of the headset jammed. Alice shoved her hand into it, feeling around inside. There was metal, plastic, and something else. Something large, rounded like a horseshoe, and a little damp. Something that had not been here before. Alice greedily clutched at the finding and pulled it into the light. Her fingers were holding a human jaw with pinkish scraps of meat on it. Alice shuddered with disgust, but she did not let the abomination out of her hand and began to study it closely, hoping to find some clue, but she saw nothing but a couple of black cavities. Those are trivial things, she thought. Could not let it disappear now, even if she would have to drag it in her teeth. Something banged sharply and loudly on the window. Alice jumped with fright and turned around. Through the loose blinders, all she could see was deep, merciless darkness and the pale light of a street lamp somewhere far below. There was a loud, piercing knock. Alice shuddered. Pebbles. Someone was throwing pebbles at the window. She rushed to the window, threw back the blinds and looked down, but saw only something bright and large flashed in a tiny patch of light at the bottom of the endless night, as if a huge fat caterpillar had crawled through. Cursing, Alice backed away from the window, and realized her hands were empty. The jaw was gone. Alice looked around, but there was only a shambles of ordinary, familiar, normal things around her. It is a trick. She must turn at a knock to make the toys disappear. With anger, she kicked a crate on the floor. There it was again. Once again it felt like she was remembering something long forgotten. Suddenly, the clear summer sky flashed brightly before her eyes like a meteor, her fingers became sticky from a soda, and the smell of wormwood touched her nostrils. And then she saw them, her friends. They were sitting on the bench in front of her, tanned, dirty, mosquito-bitten, but happy faces. Alice remembered their names very vaguely. She had lost contact with them when her mother had taken her from the village to the district center. Masa, Lena, Sasha, Irina, Nada. The names came to mind by themselves, as if rising from the muddy bottom. She remembered that very day, how they were sitting on a bench near the house of one of them, Sasha's house, she thought, and were deciding what to spend on the change they had collected in their pockets. Alice also remembered how one night, when her mother was already asleep, the girls threw a pebble at Alice's window and asked her to go outside. A chill slid down her back. Alice swallowed heavily, her throat was dry. Between those two episodes, something had happened. Something especially important. Something awful. But Alice could not reach for that memory, as if her mind were beating against a blank wall. Not yet. Terror, mixed with morbid curiosity, urged her on. Not sure what she was doing, Alice clenched her hand into a fist and tapped her knuckles on the tabletop a few times. Something had changed. Alice realized it at once, but she could not explain what it was. It was as if the air itself had become different. Alice realized she was on the right path. It had started in the hospital, Alice thought, dumping the contents of the kitchen cupboard over the stove on the floor. By now she could already allow herself to think about the madness going on and try to understand it. Everything at the hospital had been as normal as it could be, but the world had shifted off its axis as soon as she stepped over the threshold of the house. In the cabinet above the drawer where Alice had found the jaw, in a tin cookie box, in a pile of skeins of thread and needles, she found a warm, wet kidney. Keeping her eyes on the finding, Alice rushed into the hallway. She was only a few steps away from the front door when a sudden attack of sharp pain pierced her lower abdomen. The pain was so intense that Alice cried out and nearly fell. Her lower back shot up, her body jerked involuntarily, bent in half, and the tin can fly out of her hands, crashing to the floor. The sound was as loud as a gunshot, and it pierced into her eardrums. Alice did not hold back a cry of despair. Collapsing to her knees, she turned the jar upside down and began to scatter the needles and thread. The needles jabbed into her fingers, but Alice did not notice the pain. There was no kidney. The creature had stolen it. As if in mockery of Alice, a quiet thud was heard somewhere behind her. Her jaws clenched so tightly that her teeth seemed about to break. Her hands shook with anger. Alice clutched the jar in her hands. The metal was slick with blood and sweat. "You like to play, bitch?" Her voice came out of her throat hard and hoarse. "Come out. Show yourself." Alice threw the crumpled can into the living room, and it clattered to the floor. Breathing heavily, Alice looked around, hoping to see, hear or feel the creature roaming around her. Nothing. The creature did not answer her. Either it had not yet found its ears or its tongue. It hit Alice. The puzzle pieces in her mind came together. Everything seemed so obvious and clear that Alice was amazed at herself. How could she not have realized it? The creature was not just playing hide and seek with Alice, she was assembling a body for herself. She. Why did Alice think that the monster was a she? Another thought followed. Monstrous, blasphemous, unacceptable, cruel. Alice would more easily accepted the fact of her death on the operating table, and was now wandering in her own hell, than. Come on, Alice said to herself with a strange cruelty. Come on, say it. At least in your mind. Have some courage. Dimitri is not around, and probably is nowhere now. You are yourself almost gone. Say it. Then the spirit of her own daughter is torturing her. Her unborn daughter. No, no, no. Would her child, her own child, torture her? Her daughter, as blue-eyed and blonde as Alice, wanted revenge on her mother because her body had betrayed them both? The mother had failed to provide livable flesh, and the daughter had decided to harvest it herself. An eye, a leg, a jaw, a kidney. What happens when her mother assembles her whole body? A cold, clammy dread squeezed Alice's throat. This could not happen. The dead must lie in their graves while the living mourn them. All the flesh she stole needs to be found and destroyed. Alice cannot let it out into the world. It is not her daughter. Her gaze came across the knife rack again. Since the creature would not let her out of the game, she needed to break its toys. Alice was no longer frightened by what the creature could do to her, better a horrible end than a horror without an end. But what had she done to Dimitri? Alice threw everything off the table and arranged the knives in front of her in an even row. A heavy cleaver would be good for chopping bones. Alice slipped it behind the waistband of her sweatpants. Alice clutched the sharp meat knife in her hand. Dimitri had sharpened it the day before yesterday, Alice thought absently, examining the blade. She tried to remember her husband's face, but she could not. There was a cold black hole above his neck. The air thickened like a heat wave. The light bulb above her head flickered. Her lower abdomen ached with a dull aching pain. What did you do to your father? Alice asked, and her words hung in the viscous air. Not sure what she was doing, Alice reached out and tapped the table several times, clearly and separately. Alice was not going to turn over every box looking for organs. She needed to play fast and big. Even if the monster collected a full set of intestines, it was pointless without limbs. How many more times could she take something from those people with disabilities guarding the door? Quickly, before the lights went out, Alice unlocked drawers and cabinets, fumbled through them with her hand, and moved on to the next. There was nothing remotely resembling flesh in them. The hallway between the kitchen and the living room was dark. Every step felt like an ache in her stomach, like the creature was stabbing her with a blunt knife. She is afraid, Alice thought with satisfaction. I have an advantage. If it could do me actual harm, it would have done it by now. She can only swing away, not hit. She saved me from those things down there. Because I am her mother, Alice realized. The mother's womb gives flesh to the child. But what about the father? What did you do to your father? Alice asked again but got no answer. The light bulb in the living room exploded with a loud pop. Alice squeezed her eyes shut and felt shrapnel showering her. The bedroom light bulb exploded next. Alice opened her eyes. Contrary to her expectations, she was not in total darkness. The lantern that had been shining far below was now shining directly into the window. The moon. Alice remembered the moon. Back then, in her distant childhood, when the girls had thrown pebbles at her window, the moon had shone as brightly as the lantern did now. That night, when Alice had jumped from the windowsill to the ground and talked to the girls, she had wanted very badly for some reason to go back, curtain the window, cover herself with a blanket and never see them again. There was something wrong with her friends. Masa, Lena, Sasha, Irina, Nada. They all appeared before her again, as they had on that sweltering day, smelling of wormwood and soda, but they were not smiling anymore. They all had something in common now. Or rather, they did not, part of an arm, part of a leg, an eye, or an ear. Lost it, Alice, and I cannot remember what it was. They would all come to Alice to retrieve what the creature had taken from them. Her friends were not always like that. Neither were the crazy ones that guarded her door. Something bad happened between the sunny day that smelled like wormwood and the moonlit night permeated with fear. Alice gripped the knife tighter. The living room had 2 armchairs, a computer desk with ample drawers, and a couch. Plenty of room. Had the creature managed to re-hide its toys? Carefully, so not to step on the broken glass, Alice moved toward the couch. There was plenty of space under the cushions, a whole pile of severed arms and legs could be hidden there. But neither in the sofa, nor in any of the chairs, nor in the table Alice found anything. The desperate determination that had given her strength was still buzzing in her blood, but it was slowly receding. Alice felt that just a little more, and she would once again begin to convince herself that it was just a hallucination after the anesthesia. Feverish thoughts flitted through her head like wind-blown leaves. Ignoring the pain from the glass splinters, Alice took a firm step toward the bedroom. The closet held nothing but rags. The heavy drawers of an expensive antique dresser, a gift from her mother-in-law, flew mercilessly to the floor. Nothing. Sick excitement was replaced by despair. The brat had tricked her again. Alice collapsed onto the mattress and sobbed loudly, but the tears would not flow from her eyes. "Come out, you bitch. Show your face." Alice beat the mattress with the knife until her shoulder cramped. The darkness around her was silent. Alice collapsed exhausted on the uneven pile of torn mattress. There, outside the window, were they, the mutilated women. Their flawed bodies were fused together like pieces of melting meat, and what stared back at Alice from the window no longer looked human. A ravenous caterpillar lurked behind the glass. There it was again. Alice remembered that summer in her village again. Only now, she saw not a sunny day, not a cool moonlit night, but a sleepy, viscous evening at the very edge of the village. Here was the dump where the garbage was taken by a truck. She had been playing hide-and-seek with her friend, and it was her turn to seek. Alice remembered exactly that time she had played with only one girl, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not remember with whom. But Alice remembered that her friend was hiding in a pile of garbage. Next to the tin cans were a few rolled-up mattresses, a broken TV, a paneled bed, and a closet. An ugly square closet covered in brown varnish and gum stickers. Alice's friend was hiding in that closet, and hiding badly. Alice could see thin, dirty fingers sticking out from behind the door, and an eye peeking at her. Alice did not want to go to that closet and seek her friend at all. At all. The whole thing smelled eerily wrong. Alice turned away and ran home, feeling the burning stare on her back. What happened immediately afterward, Alice remembered vaguely. The police officer had asked her something, but she did not remember what exactly. Soon after that, her mother took Alice to the city, and they never returned to the village. But the creature found her anyway. It found her, penetrated her body, and became furious when her flesh rejected the filthy soul. Something moved under Alice's belly. She rose from the gutted mattress. Beneath the pile of fabric, a thin female hand twitched and wriggled like a wounded snake, raking the air with dead fingers. Swinging around, Alice plunged the knife into the greedy palm. Loud and clear, pressing her knuckles into the floorboards, Alice tapped the floor. She realized the rules of the game. The creature was looking for parts of other people's bodies. Alice was finding parts of herself, her childhood lost in oblivion. Flesh for life. A mother gives her child a body through her own suffering. She and Alice knew each other, only Alice had forgotten it. But if won once, so she could win now. And Dimitri? This name became almost unfamiliar, not real, a half-forgotten shadow from her past life. Would Alice save him? Something changed again. The air shrank around Alice, thickened, electrified, and her nostrils were touched by a vile milky smell, the smell of raw meat. She would smell it, too, when Alice had been playing hide-and-seek with that thing, but it was mixed with the stench of the garbage that had lingered in the heat all day. What did you do to Dimitri? The words came out like a breath and hung in the thickening air. Alice did not wait for an answer and did not hope for it. The hand pierced by the knife did not disappear. Black in the gloom, the blood spread out in a cold puddle. Alice rose to her feet. The knife handle lay naturally in her palm, like an extension of her hand. Alice was going to have a daughter, with skin as pale, eyes as blue, and hair as golden as her own. Alice knew that her child would not resemble her father at all, only her. Somewhere deep inside her always lived the image of a little girl who looked like her, like a reflection in a mirror. Because Alice knew that little girl, always knew her, and her shadow had been flickering somewhere behind Alice all her life. All those distraught women, stripped of body parts, crowding under her door, Alice remembered them. They all looked like her, in skin color, hair, eyes, facial features. The creature chose them carefully, making sure they all resembled Alice in some way, because she herself wanted to be like her. Alice walked over to the closet. The smell of raw meat grew stronger. She had re-hidden her toys, and she wanted Alice to find them. Something bad had happened that distant, forgotten summer. Something brought out the evil that slumbered in the darkness. This closet held all the answers. The closet door slid aside. The stench wafted outward and became so strong that Alice felt nauseous. Darkness rippled through the closet. Alice reached into the depths of the closet and swung the knife, but the blade split the air without meeting any obstacle. As a child, Alice scrambled back inside as soon as Sasha spoke. One of them grabbed at her legs, but Alice was able to fight back and climb back into the house. The room smelled like a barn after a pig had been slaughtered. Alice clamped her nose shut. The closet door opened with a quiet creak, and something glittered inside, like a small mirror. An eye. Someone was sitting in the closet, peeking at her through the slit. Short, pale fingers showed from behind the door. Kira, Alice remembered. Her name was Kira. Kira, with whom she had become particularly good friends. Alice's other friends were offended by something and did not want to play with her anymore, just looked at her with strange, angry eyes. Kira was sitting in her closet, and it smelled like a slaughtered pig. Why did Alice even think they were friends? When had they met Kira? Alice frantically went through the memories in her head, but there was no way she could find what she was looking for. They were friends. Alice should love her. Alice should play hide-and-seek with her, and always seek. Something bad, unbelievably bad had happened after that sunny, wormwood-scented day. She must remember it. Clutching the knife in her sweaty palm, Alice stepped into the closet. With her free hand, she pulled the cleaver from behind the elastic band of her pants. It was hot and humid inside, like a heated bathhouse. Spreading her arms out to the sides, Alice fumbled for the walls of the narrow passageway leading into the darkness. Alice froze on the threshold. She had been here before, in this stuffy viscous darkness. That night when Kira had sat in her closet, Alice had not run to her mother, but had walked over to the closet and opened it for some reason. It was just as dark, stuffy, and damp inside as it was now. But why? And then what happened? A voice, Alice remembered. Someone's voice called to her from the closet, and it was not Kira's voice. This voice was strong, deep. A man's voice. The voice of someone close to her. The voice of her father. Alice gasped as if she had been slapped in the face. She had been raised her whole life by her mom alone, but all children have a father. And she had one. Her mom refused to talk about him, and only once had dropped the word that he died, but never told her how or when. Faint as a reflection in murky water, the image of a tall, heavy man with dark hair rose before her eyes. He stood on the porch of their house half turned toward Alice, but a black hungry pit gaped where his face should have been. Alice stood in the darkness, clutching her knives. They would not work against this thing, Alice realized increasingly clearly, but she did not let them out of her hands. A dangerous sense of false security, but she could not hope for more. That thing took her father. Dragged him into her closet smelling with death and meat. Now it has stolen Dimitri. Even if Alice could not save her father, she would not just give her husband to her. She had already defeated Kira once, so she could do it again. Alice took a step into the darkness. One more. And another. The closet doors slammed shut somewhere behind her. For a moment, panic rose inside, wanting to turn around, to run away, to try again, to go around, but Alice suppressed the urge. Kira held her captive, and she had done something to Dimitri and her father. She cannot back down because that is all she is waiting for. The bitch wants to scare Alice into backing down. But there is nowhere to retreat, only bottomless darkness and a pack of mad women behind her. One step. Another step. Alice could not tell if she was a grown woman or a little girl anymore. Past and present overlapped and merged into one. Heat. Moisture. The floor beneath her feet became wet and rubbery. The knife blade slid along the soft wall, the little child's hands touching the slimy surface. From somewhere out of the depths of the hot darkness came a voice. Her heart jumped in her chest. The voice was barely audible, but in the silence, broken only by ragged breathing and the rustling of blood in Alice's ears, the voice rumbled like thunder. A man's voice. Dimitri. He is still alive. She could save him. Alice quickened her step. Her feet slid on the damp, elastic floor of a cabin. Cabin. Alice remembered the word. Let's go to my cabin, Kira said. She and Alice were squatting in the vegetable garden behind the house, under a honeysuckle bush. Alice tried to remember what Kira looked like, but all she could see were dirty feet in worn, tattered sandals. Her mom always told Alice that looks did not matter, and she could be friends with anyone, but Alice decided not to play with Kira anymore once the other girls stopped pouting at her. And what had she done to them? Let's go to the cabin, Kira repeated, and Alice was doused with a nasty smell from her mouth. Nah, my mom won't let me, Alice lazily lied. In fact, she was allowed to go anywhere except the river and the cemetery, but she did not want to go to Kira's cabin. Come on. Let us go. Kira's voice was nasty, rattling, like a small child, and it always seemed as if her friend were about to cry. I can't. Daddy's there, Kira said. Let's go. Daddy. Kira took her dad, now she has taken her husband. But why her, why Alice? Why her family? What did they do? What did she do? It was getting hotter. The air rushed into her throat like thick kissel. Her lungs burned. Her head was spinning, but Alice stabbed herself in the shoulder, and the pain brought her to her senses. The cabin. She would come to that cabin, break it down, and kill that bitch. How many lives had that bitch taken? She never could take hers, Alice's. The bitch got no guts for it. Anger and anticipation gave her strength. A faint reddish light slowly diluted the darkness. I'm coming to your cabin, Alice wheezed, and clenched her knives tighter. Open the door. When the darkness turned to reddish twilight, Alice found herself in front of a door, red, and as damp and stubby as the walls of the corridor, but with a white handle. Alice jerked the knob, and the door opened. She was there again, in her childhood home, the house she never went back to after her screaming and sobbing mother had yanked her out of the closet and run outside. Alice recognized the table by the window, the chairs, the fridge from the Soviet Union, the stove, the old sofa in the living room, the rug on the boardwalk floor. Only this was not Alice's house, but Kira's. Kira's house, molded from meat and bones. Meat. The walls glistened wetly in the light that filtered inside the cabin through the layers of flesh. In the folds between the fibers of muscle, Alice could see white bones stacked like logs. The false windows went nowhere, and a thin pinkish membrane covered the gaps in the mass of flesh. Eyes, dozens, hundreds, thousands of blue, Alice-like eyes followed her. Meat, meat, meat. Living, breathing flesh that responded to Alice's touch. Of how many people had Kira ripped muscle off to build herself a cabin? Alice felt how little time she had left. Something alive, swarming like grave worms, was moving, and twitching somewhere in the back of her head, ready to flood her consciousness. Something scary. Something from a distant, forgotten summer. No one liked Kira, dirty, stinking of sweat, urine, cigarettes, and that inedible stuff her mother cooked. Kira's voice was disgusting, and she was talking all kinds of crap about how men gave her mom food and vodka to go with them to the bathhouse, or how her dad peed the bed when he fell asleep drunk. The girl tailed them, and even if she was kicked out, she just lagged by a couple of steps, but she never thought of leaving, and after a while, as if nothing had happened, she got into the conversation. For some reason, she especially liked Alice. She often caught Kira's greedy gaze, and one evening she saw her hiding in the bushes near the fence, watching her family. Sometimes her mother beckoned Kira to come over, but Kira ran away like a frightened animal. One day, Kira simply disappeared. There was a loud party in her house all night, and Kira did not show up on the street the next day. She slept it off, the girls decided. It was not a big loss, they hardly noticed it. Kira showed up on the street a few days later. They were playing hide and seek. Alice was leading. She turned to face the big oak tree with its spreading crown, and began to count, tiptoeing with impatience. Alice found no one. Only Kira. She was peeping at Alice, lurking in the bushes outside her house. Alice could see her feverishly sparkling eyes, her worn sandals, and her dirty fingers clutching thin twigs. Thus began their strange, incomprehensible friendship. All the girls, as if conspired, sharply disliked Alice. Something terrible had happened to Kira. She disappeared for a reason. What came back and befriended Alice was no longer Kira. The police officer had asked Alice something, only she could not remember what. Now a picture came to mind, how some nasty people, both male and female, men in uniform were leading out of Kira's house. The nasty people were walking in a line, leaning forward and with their hands in the air. They looked like those nauseating hairy caterpillars sniffing around in a rotting corpse. If there was God, he had brought Alice here, he had kept her sane, to rid the world of this monster, to keep Kira from killing further. But time was running out. Kira, called someone's cheerful, sonorous voice, clear and pure as a child's. I am here. Meet me. Alice walked into the living room. The flesh sprang and contracted under her steps. A vile, nauseating parody of her childhood home, born of a diseased mind. But the creature was not here. The crawling worms of chaos crept closer and closer to Alice's eyes. Time was running out. The closet. The same closet in the junkyard, reeking of meat. Kira lay there, a mountain of shredded limbs. Her parents, something inside Alice said. A slutty mother and a degenerate father. Those creatures had long ago ceased to be human, and nothing would have stopped them from killing their own daughter. They just did not have the brains to properly dispose of the body. That noisy night, Alice remembered the echo of loud music and distant muffled shouts.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.